Hello and welcome back. There are 4 new Doctor Who books out. They've all been released since Christmas, and they are adaptations of the 3 David Tennant, Catherine Tate episodes and Ncuti Gatwa's Christmas Day debut. I've got them, I've read them. Are they worth your time? Let's find out. Yes, Doctor Who books are back. Doctor Who books have a long and colourful history. I'm not going to go through it all in detail here because I'm sure you know it all already. But it went back to the 1960s when 3 novelisations of William Hartnell stories, the first Dalek story, the Crusade, and Bill Strutton's Weird the Web Planet, were released. Can't have been hugely successful because there weren't any more books. And it seems like an obvious route for Doctor Who to go down. Books based on the TV stories or perhaps even new stories. It didn't happen. It wasn't until 1973 that a new imprint called Target Books republished those 3 books in colourful new jackets, and they were bestsellers in the children's market. This led to Target negotiating with the BBC the rights to produce new Doctor Who books based on the TV serials, many of them written by the original authors of the scripts, most of them written by the great Terrance Dicks, who for many of us is Uncle Terry, because he's the one who opened up the doorway to Doctor Who's past. Because at that time, of course, there was no DVD, there was no Blu-ray, there was no VHS. Doctor Who's history was very much locked in the BBC's archives, and there was very little prospect of us seeing these episodes again. So these books gave us access to Doctor Who's past. And I, as a viewer of the 60s, I sort of remembered some of these episodes. I'd seen them at the time, but of course, because of the ephemeral nature of TV at the time, you didn't retain the memories of these things particularly. You sort of thought you vaguely remembered watching them, but not in any great detail. So the books were the gateway for so many of us and so many fans into the history of Doctor Who's past, unlocking this secret hidden archive. The books carried on for years. Terrance Dicks wrote most of them, and as I said, he was... we fondly remember Terrance Dicks because of his work in creating this archive from the archive, this written archive. And many of his later books were a bit perfunctory. I think a lot of his books from the late Tom Baker period, for example, are very much 100-page jobs. He said, she said, they ran with very little background material. The best of the Doctor Who books were ones that added something to the story, added to the characters, added a bit of narrative, added plot points that perhaps plugged gaps in the plot itself. And that was the history of Doctor Who books. We now have novelisations available of every Doctor Who story ever made, and that's quite an achievement. The last few came out a couple of years ago. And a few years ago, the BBC resurrected the Target imprint and started issuing novelisations based on recent TV episodes. That always seemed like an odd concept because we have 50-minute TV episodes that necessarily need to be expanded to 150 pages. And with the accessibility of Doctor Who now on iPlayer and on physical media, if you're still into that, and yeah, I am, you can watch a Doctor Who episode at any time. Why do you need reminding of it by a book? However, we have had this new run of books which have presumably been quite successful because there are new ones coming out every year or so. We get 4 or 5 new books published, which are versions and adaptations of recent TV episodes. And the best of them are really very good because they are written by the original scriptwriters who know the stories inside and out. They can go back to different drafts of the script. They can add different material. And as I said, they can identify places where the plot needed a little bit more explanation, can add a bit more background that just makes it flow as a book. And that is the art, turning a TV episode into a book, because they're different mediums. And the best Doctor Who books do that. Do they do it for this new batch of books, though? That's the question. So I'm going to be looking at the 4 new books that have come out, he said, almost dropping one on the floor. We have the 3 Target paperbacks of the David Tennant specials from November, December last year. The Star Beast, Wild Yonder, and The Giggle. And they're all available now. I haven't seen them in shops yet. I mean, I haven't been into many bookshops lately, and I am reminded of the time when you go into the book departments, especially during the David Tennant era, when they brought up those hardback books, which were genuinely bestsellers. They sold so well. They were in the best-selling books of the week charts. I remember seeing the charts in, I think it was the Sunday Times or something, and you'd be marvellous seeing these Doctor Who books hanging around in the charts for weeks. I don't know how that happens now, but I think it's great to see that these books are still out there, whether Whether they're top quality novels or not is a matter for you. So we start off looking at these books. The first one is The Star Beast by Gary Russell. Gary Russell has a long history of Doctor Who, and I sort of know him a little bit from years ago when I used to work on various Doctor Who fan publications with him. But I don't know him well, but our paths crossed decades ago probably. And of course he's gone on to become involved in Doctor Who, script editor for some time, worked on things like Sarah Jane Adventures. He's been involved in Big Finish, does a lot of Doctor Who related stuff. I think it's difficult because The Star Beast isn't a great book. It's very, very Terrance Dicks, and I think if it's an homage to Terrance Dicks, I think it works very well. But I think what it doesn't do, unfortunately, it doesn't really interrogate the story, it doesn't interrogate the characters and explore the characters in any great depth. It is very much what we saw on television, with a couple of little additions here and there. It runs to a rather 150 pages, which seems to be fairly standard for these books as they are now. It's not a bad book. It's not a bad book, but it doesn't come alive. It doesn't leap out of the page as doing anything different. And bearing in mind that The Star Beast has been a comic strip, it's been an audio, it's been a TV episode, now it's a book. It's the fourth medium it's appeared in, and it's hard, I suppose, to give it much of the way of new life. It's perfectly readable. The only real addition, I suppose, is a character called Stu Ferguson, who works at the factory that the Star Beast Meeps spaceship crashes into, and he sort of drifts in and out of the story a little bit. Doesn't really add very much to it. And of course, I think what Gary Russell does, and I think he's done this in previous books, he's one of these writers who likes to throw in lots of continuity references. So certainly the first few chapters are full of it. References to this little casual asides that are meant to impress fans, but I find that sort of stuff a little bit wearing, because the writer is just going, look, I know about the history of Doctor Who. And there are lots of bits here. I mean, he has added things, memos from UNIT and memos from the Shadow Proclamation, Ministry of Defence, memos, which is all very nice and very clever, but most of it is there really just to show off, I know about the Jadoon and I know about the Shadow Proclamation and UNIT and all these things. And it gets a bit wearing. It's not so bad. The second half just focuses more on the story. But all in all, if you're a fan of Terrance Dicks and you miss him, this will fit the bill. It's not a bad little read, but you'd like to think it could have done a bit more with the story and the characters. Bearing in mind how important it is in terms of the Doctor and Donna being reunited, it sort of flies through it. And to be fair, I think the episode on TV did that a little bit itself. But it's not a bad little read, but it's not the best of these four. And I will give this 5 out of 10. Better is Mark Morris's Wild Blue Yonder, which of course is based on the second special. This is pretty much the same 150 odd pages. This is the story where the Doctor and Donna end up on this spaceship which has been far in the future, at the edge of the universe, which has been invaded, if it's the right word, by this peculiar alien entity. It's a great TV episode, very weird, very unusual. And it's the only one, I would say, of the 4 episodes we've had so far that pushes at the boundaries of Doctor Who a little bit, does something slightly different. This is a good book. Again, it doesn't do a lot more than what we see on television, but basically it's better written. The language is a bit more expressive. And I think Mark Morris is a well-established writer. He's a horror novelist, and he has a nice turn of phrase about things. I won't give examples of them here, but it's quite evocative in places. And bearing in mind that this is an entirely studio set story, and there's lots of visual stuff that make the story work. Shifting walls of the spaceship and the long corridor. I think Mark Morris does a good job at expressing that and developing it. So it works. I think it works as a book because you can watch this and not necessarily have seen the TV episode. He describes the settings very well, and he creates a certain level of atmosphere, and he creates a sense of threat in these two aliens. I think they're sort of referenced by fans as the Not We, or the Not Things. And I think it works quite well. Again, it doesn't really open the story up. It is very much what we saw on television, but I think it works as a book because it's well described and evocative. I would give this 6 out of 10. However, the best of these 3 by far, and the one essential one, if you only have a budget to buy one of these books, and I'll come back to that in a bit, this is the one to get. This is James Goss's adaptation of The Giggle. As you can see from the spine, it's a thicker book than the other two. This runs to over 200 pages. This works as a book in so many ways. James Goss has adapted things like City of Death and Pirate Planet in the past. I'm sure he's done loads of other things for Big Finish and so on. But this is a really well-written book, and it works as a book because he's not just looked at the TV episode. He has reimagined it in a way, and he tells it from a slightly different perspective. I'm not going to spoil that perspective by telling you what it is, but and it takes a few chapters for you to realise, oh, hang on, this is this. And when you realise that, it sort of clicks really well. It's very imaginatively written. He's used some very interesting literary devices to power the story here. And the story is as we saw it on television, but I like the slightly shifting perspectives here and there. He handles certain sequences very well, the musical sequence with the Spice Girls, for example, because there are obviously rights issues in terms of lyrics in the book. He gets around that very well and very wryly, very cleverly done. It's a really imaginatively written book. There's lots of very evocative phrasing, very evocative imagery. It works, I'd say, this is of the three, this is the one that to me works as a standalone book in its own right. You can read this without having seen the episode, and I think you could do that with all of them, really. But you get a better experience with this just because it is better written. And there's a sense in the writing that he's enjoying writing it. He's enjoying the creative process of taking this difficult story and putting it into text. What I like about it as well, one of my criticisms of the TV episode, which I love, is you don't really get much sense of chaos being caused on the earth. You get all this stuff about it's the end of the world and the giggle, but you don't see a lot of it. And here you get a bit more depth to it. There's a bit more explanation of things happening around the world and the chaos being caused by the giggle. I'm going to give this 9 out of 10. It's a really, really good book, and I can't recommend it highly enough, really. Final book to mention has just been released this last week, and it's the hardback edition. There is a paperback coming out if you want your Target edition. That's coming out in July, I believe. It's a sort of a lavish hardback edition of The Church on Ruby Road, which of course was Ncuti Gatwa's debut story from Christmas Day. This is written by a relatively newish writer, Esme Jakimi Pearson, who I think, if you look at the back blurb, gives you a little detail about her history as a writer. I enjoyed this, actually. I started reading it and thought, yeah, this is just, he said, she said, but it isn't. It isn't, actually. This is more emotional, I think, is a word that springs to mind. It does a lot of good stuff in terms of fleshing out, particularly Ruby. Ruby gets a lot of background stuff that we didn't have in the TV episode. We learn a bit more about her background. Some of her previous life experiences dotted through, so you get a more rounded version of her. And bearing in mind, she was pretty well done and pretty well defined in the TV episode. But there's nice detail about her here, and indeed about her foster mother, Carla. This is quite a small-scale story, if you sort of remember the TV episode. A lot of it is set in Ruby's flat. Then we have the scenes up with the goblins, and so it's quite, compared to The Giggle, it's a much more intimate story, and I think that's probably the word I was looking for rather than emotional. It's very intimate. It's an intimate book that focuses on the Doctor meeting Ruby, and I think the whole nature of, and it's a very simple story with the goblins stealing the baby Lulabelle, then reversing time so they can steal Ruby, and I think the story comes across, the narrative actually flows a little bit better here because, of course, she's got time to sort of explain it a bit more than the hectic script did, and it actually works quite well. And as I got into it, and again, it's 140 odd pages. This is a book you can sit down and read in a couple of hours, really. I read it in 2 sittings, and it feels warm. It feels like a warm hug of a book and of a story. It's really very nicely written, actually, bearing in mind, and I hate the word nice, it's so meaningless in a way, but it's warm, and she gets into the Doctor's head, she gets into Ruby's head, and it's just a pleasant and enjoyable read, and I give this a 7 out of 10. So the question is, are you going to buy these books? Now, the issue I have about these books is they're hella expensive. When the Target books came out in the 70s, they were 25p a pop, and that was lovely. And over the years, of course, prices went up and prices went up. You don't expect to get books for 25p these days. However, I'm not sure I could advise you to spend $9.99 on the Star Beast, for example. If you go into a bookshop, especially places like Tesco and Asda, you can pick up a paperback for £5. And they're not worth a tenner. That's the problem. You'll find them cheaper online. Amazon have got them a little bit cheaper, but they're still going to cost you around £9 each. And for the length of time that you're going to spend reading them, I mean, if you've got a day free, you could certainly read these two quite quickly. And you could do this in a day. I can't say that they're good value for money, unfortunately, because I think that $6.99, $7.99 is probably a decent price point for these. But Doctor Who completists will, of course, want them, and they will rush out and get them, and hopefully they will enjoy them to an extent. But I don't think at a tenner they're necessarily great value for money. Again, the Church on Ruby Road, I think that's a recommended retail price is £15. I got this from Amazon. I think it was originally when I pre-ordered it, it was £13.19. I think it went down to about £12 something. It's a hardback book. But you can get hardback books in supermarkets for a tenner, and this is, not exactly War and Peace or Lord of the Rings. So ultimately, it's down to you. You pay your money, you make your choice, etc. If you're on a budget, I would say get the Giggle and maybe go back and pick up the others as and when you can, or if you want to. But the Giggle, I would say, of these four. In fact, I'm going to rank them because people like things being ranked. In fourth place, unfortunately, is Mr. Gary Russell's The Star Beast. In third place, I'm going to put Wild Blue Yonder. In second place, we have The Church on Ruby Road. And the best of these four is The Giggle, because it's a genuinely, excitingly written book. And it feels like he enjoyed writing it too. And I get that impression. I think all of them, I'm sure they're enjoyable experiences to write. But you don't necessarily get that same feeling on reading them. So, yeah, that's the new Doctor Who books. Hope this video might help you make your decision on which ones you're going to pick up. If you're a hardcore Doctor Who fan, of course, you're going to get them all sooner or later, so what the hell. But I think I wanted to read them fairly quickly, because I do like the Doctor Who books, and I have a affection for them. And I will say, in conclusion, I think what these four books do together, as a whole, as a quartet of books, they do bind the new direction of Doctor Who slightly. Certainly in The Church on Ruby Road, she's made an effort to reference things like The Giggle, which the TV episode didn't do, and tie in the events of The Giggle. And I think you see that progression, in fact, across the 4 episodes. The new fantasy elements that Doctor Who's going to be focusing on in the future, or at least developing in the future. Russell T Davies has said that the new episodes will be much more fantastical rather than science fiction as such. And you can see that developing here through obviously we have the Wild Blue Yonder, where the Doctor uses his superstition, that superstition thing with the salt, to try and keep the creatures at bay. And there's very much the suggestion that doing that has opened up another universe that more outrageous and fantastical things can happen. And you do get the sense of that across these 4 books that sort of develops it. And that's quite a nice thing about the 4 books, is that arc runs subtly underneath them all. So anyway, that's these new books. Let me know if this video has been helpful to you. Let me know if you've enjoyed it, also important. If you have enjoyed it and found it useful, leave a comment down below. Tell me what you think of the books, if you've read them, if you're going to buy them, which ones you're thinking of buying. Like and subscribe if you're new here. Loads of Doctor Who content going back throughout the channel, loads more to come. And other things as well. It's not just Doctor Who, films, TV, out and about, all sorts of stuff. So stick around, why don't you? I'll see you soon. Until I do, keep taking the stuff.